Peppa Pig. She doesn't blink anymore. At first, it was just a small thing. Peppa noticed that Mummy Pig had stopped blinking completely. The morning was normal. The smell of toast, the clinking of dishes, but Mummy was standing by the stove just staring at the frying pan, at the wall, at the window, her eyes always wide open. At first, Peppa thought she imagined it, then that it was some kind of joke. "Mom, you haven't blinked in 5 minutes," she said during breakfast. Mummy smiled, but her eyes stayed tense and unblinking. The smile appeared with a strange delay, as if she had just remembered she was supposed to make it. "Everything's fine, dear," Mummy said in a flat tone. "I just have to keep watching you." At that moment, George dropped his spoon. He stared at Mummy with wide, trembling eyes. Throughout the day, Mummy began to change. First, her neck grew slightly longer, stretching unnaturally when she turned her head. Peppa blinked, and for a moment, Mummy stretched nearly to the ceiling. Then she was normal again. The next day, Daddy Pig disappeared. "He's at work," Mummy said. "Left in the night. Don't you remember?" Peppa didn't, but Daddy's boots were still in the closet, wet with dark stains, and Mummy's eyes still didn't blink. In the kitchen, she didn't eat anymore. She just stood there, and at night, she tapped her nails on the window like she was counting. A day later, George was gone. "He's playing hide and seek," Mummy whispered, "and until he blinks, we can't find him." Her voice was distorted. It sounded like it had been played backwards, and her eyes were larger now, like an insect's. Peppa tried not to look at her face, but in every reflection, the microwave, the window, the spoon, Mummy stood behind her, closer than she was in real life. That night, Peppa woke to a strange sound, like someone scratching the ceiling. She opened her door. Mummy stood at the end of the hallway, her arms dragged along the floor. The skin on her face had darkened. Beneath her eyes, deep black hollows. Her mouth slowly stretched from cheek to cheek. "You're still blinking, Peppa," she whispered, "and I told you, don't blink." Peppa ran to the door, but the doorknob melted in her hand. The house began to breathe. The ceiling pulsed, and thick black liquid oozed from the walls. On the floor, Mummy's footprints. 6 toes, long, clawed. In the bathroom mirror, Peppa saw her again. Mummy stood right behind her, her face no longer human. Eyes pitch black, mouth gaping toothlessly to her chest, neck twisted like rope. When Peppa turned around, she was gone. She ran through the house, but behind every corner, only Mummy, or whatever she had become. In the closet, huge wet eyes that didn't blink. Under the table, a hand twisted backwards. On the wall, the family photo where only Peppa remained. Finally, she locked herself in her room, sat down, shut her eyes, and cried. "I won't blink," she whispered. "I won't." But it was too late. The door opened, silently. Mummy walked in. But it wasn't Mummy anymore. It was a creature, stretched tall, arms to the floor, a head on a long neck, and eyes like spotlights. It didn't blink. It only stared. "Now you won't either," Peppa heard inside her mind. The last thing she saw was a massive black eye rushing toward her, and then only darkness. In the morning, Peppa sat at the table. Alone, she was smiling, too wide, and she didn't blink. Peppa Pig. Scary class with cursed Madame Gazelle. The morning started off strange. The house was too quiet. No bird song, no usual clinking of breakfast dishes. Peppa was the first to wake up, which was odd, since George always did. He was lying with his eyes open, not moving, as if he had simply forgotten how. "George," Peppa whispered. He slowly turned to her and mouthed, barely audible, "Don't go to school today." A chill ran down Peppa's spine, but Mummy Pig was already calling them to breakfast and everything seemed normal, almost, except neither Mummy nor Daddy Pig blinked, not even once. The walk to school was covered in grey fog. The trees looked like they bent away, refusing to see. No sound at all except for footsteps. When the school finally emerged from the mist, Peppa's heart tightened. The windows were pitch black, as if painted over from inside. The sign that read Madame Gazelle's preschool was hanging crookedly, as if someone had tried to tear it down. The yard was empty. Only the front door was open, and Madame Gazelle stood in the doorway. But something was wrong with her. She used to seem kind, even if a bit strict. Now her eyes were far too large, glowing unnaturally. Her eyelashes were like needles, and her mouth, it looked wider than before, much wider. "Good morning, children," she said in a flat, metallic voice. Peppa stepped inside. The air smelled of mold and dampness. All the kids were already seated, silent. Susie, Danny, Pedro, but no one turned around. Their faces were blank, their eyes glassy. "We're starting a new course," said Madame Gazelle. "Today's lesson is called Silence." Peppa didn't understand what was going on. When she tried to whisper to Susie, Susie turned and opened her mouth. There was no tongue, only a deep black hole. Madame Gazelle appeared right next to her. "No talking," she whispered with a ghastly grin. Her mouth was no longer smiling. It unhinged, stretching all the way down to her collarbone. Inside was darkness and something moving. Peppa backed away, but the door was already shut, locked. Where the blackboard used to be was now a huge screen. Faces began to appear, dozens, hundreds of children's faces. They were screaming silently, their mouths wide with horror. Then the screen went dark. "These are the ones who didn't obey," said Madame Gazelle. "Now, let's recite the spell." The children stood up. Words began to spill from their mouths, though their eyes remained lifeless. Peppa didn't recognize the language. Her head spun, her ears rang. She bolted from the classroom, but the hallway was no longer the same. It stretched endlessly. The walls were peeling, covered in children's drawings, all showing Madame Gazelle with 3 eyes and arms filled with mouths. On the floor, footprints led inward, but none led out. She saw George in one of the open doors. He was crying. "She took me," he sobbed. "She said I'm part of the class now." When Peppa turned around, Madame Gazelle was right there. Her body had elongated. Her arms reached toward the ceiling. A voice echoed inside Peppa's mind. "You'll be my star student, Peppa. You'll learn everything." The world started to dissolve. The ceiling vanished, leaving only walls, pulsing, dark, alive. Voices rose around her. Some sang nursery rhymes, others cried, others cackled with madness. In the chaos, Peppa fainted. She woke up, in bed. It was morning. Everything looked normal, except when she looked in the mirror. Madame Gazelle was standing behind her, and when Peppa blinked, the reflection smiled back with an impossibly wide, pitch-black grin.
Peppa Pig. Playdate with Shadow Peppa. One sunny day, Peppa was sitting in her room. George was napping after lunch, Mummy Pig was washing dishes, and Daddy Pig had gone shopping. Peppa pulled out her sketchbook and crayons and began to draw. She didn't know what she wanted to draw. Her hand seemed to move on its own across the paper. Soon, a figure appeared on the page, one that looked just like her. But something wasn't right. The drawing showed a girl in the same dress, with the same ears and shape of head. But the figure was completely coal black. No eyes, no mouth, no details, as if a shadow had come to life and taken her shape. Peppa looked at the drawing, slightly puzzled, and wrote underneath, "Shadow Peppa." She smirked and whispered, "Now I have a friend who will never leave me." The next morning, the drawing was gone. The page had disappeared. Peppa thought maybe it fell behind the dresser or that Mummy accidentally threw it away. But when she went outside, there was a figure standing by the swings. The same one, the one from the drawing. Only now, it was real. "Shadow Peppa," Peppa whispered as she approached. The figure nodded silently. It looked exactly like her, but completely black. Even the eyes had no pupils, like 2 holes in a mask. Peppa wasn't scared at first. On the contrary, she thought it was real magic. She took its hand and went to play. They spent the entire day together, jumping, running, spinning. Shadow Peppa mimicked everything she did, silently. When Peppa laughed, the shadow would open its mouth, but no sound came out. George saw her and immediately started crying. Mummy Pig peeked out the window and froze. Outside, she said, there was only one Peppa. "Who were you playing with?" she asked later. "My friend," Peppa replied, pointing to the window. But there was no one there. Each night, things became stranger. The shadow began to appear in reflections, in the mirror, in the TV screen, even in spoons. Sometimes it would stand by the bed as Peppa slept. Sometimes it whispered to her. At first, Peppa couldn't make out the words, just a faint rustling. But then she started to understand the phrases. The voice sounded exactly like hers. "Give in," the shadow said. "I'm better than you. I am you." Peppa started feeling worse. She forgot where she was. She couldn't remember the names of her toys. One day, she called Mummy Pig by a stranger's voice. The shadow was now always nearby. It didn't leave. It sat with the family at the table when no one was looking. It appeared in the corners of rooms when Peppa was alone. And one night, it stood by George's bed, watching him sleep. Daddy Pig tried to talk to Peppa, but she wouldn't respond. Sometimes she whispered to herself, or to someone only she could see. The family grew frightened. The house got colder, lights flickered, and footsteps echoed in the hallway, as if someone else lived there too. On the fifth day, Peppa vanished, simply faded away. In her room, only one thing remained, the drawing, the same one. It was now completely covered in black, but under the light you could still see a face, Peppa's real face with empty eyes. Mummy Pig screamed. At that moment, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Peppa entered the room. Same figure, same voice, but her eyes pitch black, and her smile unnaturally wide as if drawn on. "Mummy," she said, "I'm home now." Mummy hugged her, not noticing how cold and dry her body was, like paper, and the shadow behind her back moved on its own, out of sync with her. Later, George said it wasn't Peppa, but no one believed him, because she looked the same, almost, and the real Peppa stayed inside the mirror. She tried to scream, but no sound came through the glass, and every time someone looks at their reflection, she looks back, waiting to be seen.